Game genres. Much like film and other media, games also come in a variety of genres that suit different players and their play styles. Games is an interesting one because it has such an evolving landscape of genres, things that we'll be exploring during this lesson. First of all, what is a genre? How do we define a genre? And why is it important to have a genre? Well, a genre is a collection of codes and conventions that we associate to that particular type of genre. So, for example, horror, what do we expect to see in a horror game? What do we expect to see in a sports game? It's these expectations that we are formally signing a social contract with our audiences, saying what they can expect and what they can enjoy from our games. If we don't follow the codes and conventions of a genre, what do you think would happen? Well, our audience will be alienated and confused about the game that they're playing. So as much as you want to evolve and create new genres and make really interesting game design choices that push the boundaries of where games go, you still have to follow some certain rules that people have set out before you. And so it's crucial for game designers to be able to explore game genres, and in particular ones they're going to focus on as a specialism, and play games in that field a lot. And understand not only where games are currently in terms of that genre, but also where they have been, as they typically have circular trends, meaning that what was a trend 10 years ago may just come back. So over the course of the next few videos, we're going to be going over a selection of game genres, and this isn't by no means an exhaustive list. There's loads of game genres, and also we're not exploring every single code and convention inside that genre. But you should be able to identify after this which games belong to which genre. Whilst going through this, it may be worthwhile to think about the games that you're playing and thinking, what genre do they belong in? And why do you play the games that you play? Action adventure. Action adventure games are a really popular genre in games. The likes of Tomb Raider, God of War, Last of Us, Uncharted. These games are often populating the Game Awards and also the top charts of sales. But what is an action adventure game? How do we define what is the difference between an adventure game and an action adventure game? So first of all, let's break this down into two different genres. We've got action and we've got adventure. Let's take a look at adventure. Now, a typical adventure game is the exploration of an area, collecting items and tools, and using those items and tools to complete challenges, often puzzle related. A good subgenre of these adventure games is the point-and-click adventure games such as Day of the Tentacle and others. Adventure games are typically more slower paced and require the player to be more puzzle orientated rather than combat orientated. So if that is an adventure game, what is an action game? Well, an action game is the idea of a player being in combat situations more so than anything else. A good example of these are your first-person shooter games. This is a sub-genre of your action games, much like how we have third-person action games like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. So we now know what adventure games are and we know what action games are. So what are action adventure games? Well, much like adventure games, we have the act of the player going around and collecting items to solve problems. And as part of the solving problems, there'll be combat thrown in too. The mix between combat and puzzle solving is throughout the whole entire game, and usually involves a player having to balance the two to solve problems. It's this flexibility of the game design that makes this type of game genre very, very popular. When you couple the fast-paced action with the slow-paced adventure game, you get a really good combination of an action-orientated narrative game. So these are typically reserved for narrative games and narrative experiences like The Last of Us, for example, where the player is completing a long film narrative more so than just an interactive one. Now, we mentioned shooters a little bit in the previous video when we were talking about action games, and shooters are an action game, but specifically, as you can imagine by the name, involving shooting. Now, games like this can come in first person or in third person view modes. A first person view mode is through the eyes of the player. You're seeing it from a first person perspective, seeing the world from the eyes of the hero. Whereas a third person action game is usually viewed over the shoulder of the character, looking into the world and you're using your surroundings more so than, say, you would be in a first-person game. Now, a first-person game and a third-person game have different things to consider. That is 100% true, but they do share similar DNA. And that's mostly through their level design and act structure for creating different action sequences. Now, in the past, shooters were quite linear experiences, but what we have seen in recent years is an explosion of open world shooters through the likes of series like Far Cry, Destiny, and many others like Borderlands. We've seen players take a real liking to an open world shooter experience. And the open world changes a few things that a linear game cannot. So, for example, in an open world game, we're giving the player far more choice about how to solve a problem. This usually makes game design a little bit trickier because we do have to account for different situations and different play styles. But the end goal is the same. We want the player to be actively engaged in combat, shooting their guns, collecting ammo, using grenades, using Molotovs, whatever they can get their hands on to beat the enemies. Shooters tend to be quite easy to pick up and play too. With a lot of them sharing very similar control methods, they can easily be transferring audiences from one to the other. People who play Borderlands, for example, could quite easily pick up and play Call of Duty. This makes it a very popular genre to see players gravitate towards, and maybe why we see shooters often dominating the charts. Role-playing games. Role-playing games, or better known as RPGs, are games centered around the player customizing their characters to fulfill a role of fantasy. Now, there are different types of RPGs and different styles of RPGs, but essentially all boil down to one crucial thing, and that is the ability for the player to customize how they build their character into the gameplay. And it's this customization that often leads to unique gameplay styles that are suited to the player's playstyle. Some RPGs give you loads of freedom, room for experimentation and player growth and fantasy fulfillment, such as Baldur's Gate 3, where some are a bit more nuanced and give the player a little bit more freedom in terms of how they build their character's armor, for example, such as the Zelda games. One thing that is definitely clear, though, when we look at RPG games that are out in the market and successful, is that they do vary greatly based upon cultural differences. We see a lot of Western RPGs do well in the West, but not so well in the East, and vice versa. We see a lot more Eastern RPGs doing a lot better in Asian countries such as Japan and China, which don't necessarily do as well over here in Europe or the States. But regardless of that, RPGs are a very popular genre. And so popular, in fact, we see a lot of games implementing RPG elements into their main game. For example, Call of Duty has an RPG-like system in their multiplayer game modes. We see skill trees being used in games like Jedi Survivor. But what separates a game that's an RPG from a game that's an action-adventure game? Now, these lines are getting blurred, that's definitely true. But how do we know the difference between the two? How do we know where to sit our game in a market? And this comes down to you answering yourself a simple question, really. What is the main focus of the game? What is the main draw of the game? Yes, in Far Cry, you can customize your character, customize your loadout, customize your skills, choose how you want to play the game. But that experience doesn't really change anything in regards to the narrative exploration of the game or the world and how it is developed. Yes, there's hints of it, but it definitely has a far greater focus on the action and combat. Whereas RPGs generally don't. They generally have a greater emphasis on the fantasy building of fulfilling a role in a game. So ask yourself, why are RPG mechanics so popular? Why do we see them popping up in different types of games? One could argue the sense of reward that you get from RPG mechanics, such as leveling up, increasing your stats, is a great intrinsic way of making a player feel good about the progress they're making. So it's a good way to reward players and make them feel like they're making progress without actually giving them loads of progress. This is emphasized in games like Call of Duty, where we see players unlocking skins and emblems, which ultimately have no impact on the gameplay and their experiences with it. But the reward is worthwhile for players to keep going after time and time again. Platformers. Platformers have been around for years, since the early conceptions of the home video consoles. Games like Super Mario Bros. And Sonic the Hedgehog have become mainstays of the video game industry, have been here from the very start, and are still here today. But how do we determine what a platformer game is? Now, previously I did mention about the idea of identifying what is the main focus of the game. Is combat the main focus? Is role fulfillment another focus? Well, in a platformer game, the main focus is on, as the name implies, the platforming, the ability to jump from platform to platform and climb different areas. If you look at a game like Super Mario Odyssey, that game, yes, has enemies, yes, has basic combat, but the main focus, the main draw of the game isn't those features. The main draw is the platforming elements, the things that draw the audiences to that type of game. And much like many of the other genres we've spoken about, there's lots of bleeding over as well into different genres. A game like Doom in 2016 was released, had lots of platforming elements, even though it is primarily a shooter. And we would count it as a shooter, not a platformer. And that's because of where its focus is. Yeah, so if you think about what the player is playing the game for, what is the reason behind it, they're not going to be picking up Doom because of the platforming, they'll be picking it up because of the shooting. Much like how we pick up Mario for the exploration and platforming, and not the combat. Platformers have been integral to the evolution of games and game design, from being especially the transition from 2D to 3D. Games like Super Mario Bros. Paved the way for many types of games and how to conquer the 3D landscape. And this is the reason why they're so influential in the games industry at large. How to find and cultivate fun. As a game developer, there is more to making a game than having something that responds to your button inputs. In fact, one of the harder goals and the main goal of a game designer is to find the fun. Game design is a series of knobs, dials and sliders, all of which can be adjusted and manipulated to maximize the player experience. So let's take a look at a recent example I personally have had to work with in my own game, Mimic. In the game, players have the ability to indirectly combat other players by casting ballots and voting for which other player should be targeted by their AI enemies. This presents a problem to solve though. We can't interrupt play. The game is a horror game, so any interruption or pausing of the action will mean a loss of the tension we have built up with the player. So how do we get the player to engage in a system that is designed to be optional but feel compelled to use it? So I took inspiration from real life and looked for similar problems that have been solved. This led me to advertising. Billboards and adverts pepper highways and the media as optional media for the audience to take part in, all designed to compel the viewer into purchasing or attending something. So, much like the billboards and adverts, we keep the voting mechanic more visible, as if it's in the player's mental periphery. Secondly, I adjusted the threat the AI poses so that players will feel more of a benefit from taking advantage of the system. It's by adjusting these small but significant details that we can now see players more engaged and using the system more. So when you're thinking about your game and its design, finding the fun is a matter of looking at your core mechanics and adjusting them to maximize their desired output. For example, if you are making a platformer game, you'll want to spend your time on improving the jumping and movement controls and feel to make the simple act of getting around more fun. When you come to program or scripture games, you look for ways to insert these hooks, dials and levers to make it so that you can adjust it later and find the fun in your game. Roles in a development studio. There are many people that go into creating a game. A development studio that has a number of roles to fill, and this varies based upon the size of the studio. An independent studio may be just a handful of people or even a single solo developer, whereas a large AAA developer could have hundreds of people, each specialised in their own roles. There are different departments or categories for these roles. The art department are responsible for all things visual. These will include roles such as a concept artist or 3D modeler or animator. The art department is typically one of the largest ones and will find itself using graphical programs such as ZBrush, Maya, and the Substance Suite to name just a few. Inside of Unreal Engine, they'll be working a lot with the Material Editor, Niagara, and many other tools inside of the editor. The technical department are where your programmers live. Like art, there are specialised roles in the department, each tackling different aspects of the game. Your tools programmers are creating tools for other departments such as art to use. Network programmers are ensuring that players can connect to each other in multiplayer games. And gameplay programmers are there to script the action in the game and how the gameplay all rolls out. Depending on the type of programming you are doing in your role, you may find yourself deep in the blueprint editor, the C++ source code for the engine, or in the networking backend and server structure. The design department are leading the charge in deciding how the game plays. Level designers will work with their pencil and paper and design level layouts, and when and where encounters occur. System designers will work on the design for various systems in the game, such as combat, economy, or even equipment. System-heavy genres such as RPGs will make good use of these designers. There are many other roles in a studio, some of which could be outsourced to individuals or other studios. As mentioned before, an independent studio with just a handful of team members may see people fulfilling many roles. One thing is certain though, everyone at the studio has a massive impact on the success of the game, and it is definitely a team effort. Career paths. The games industry is big, like very big. Studios of all shapes and sizes all over the world. And there are just as many, if not more people who are vying to get into the industry and progress through it. But where do you begin? How do you progress through your career? Now, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to getting on the ladder in the games industry, and for all the advice you will get, there will always be the outliers and extreme examples that don't fit the expectation. However, most people get their start in smaller studios, which either work on very small titles and applications, or serve as cooperative studios handling outsourced work to supporting to other platforms. These roles are a great stepping stone into the industry, but how do you even get there? Having a passion for your desired role will help, as you complete courses such as this one and take part in game jams or even hobbyist development to build and bolster your portfolio, a demonstration of your skills and knowledge. You should also be networking, talking to other individuals like yourself, eager to get into games development, and talking to those who are in work and can offer their advice and guidance too. The more people you know, the greater chance and opportunity will appear. Once you are inside a studio working on a project, your prospects and opportunities will become more apparent. You will find your networking increasing exponentially. As that increases, so does the opportunities. You will most likely begin your journey in a junior role at first. Juniors are given small tasks that are less consequential but still vital for the game. For example, on the design team, you may be responsible for designing a notification system for the player. One of my first jobs was working on a minimap design, for example. As you progress, you'll be promoted and given even further increasing opportunities, usually in the same project as well. As you show your potential, you'll be given great opportunities and responsibilities. At the top of your career path, in any role, is the senior position. In a senior position, you will generally have final say in the direction of something, as well as act as line manager for other staff. Art versus design. During this course, you will hear a lot about artists and designers, but yet find yourself confused as to what the difference is between them. So, let us enlighten you. For example, let us talk about a video game level. Here is one from my game, Mimic. As a designer, your role in the level creation comes in early, with the design of the level being sketched out in a top-down design, almost like an architectural drawing. This will lead you onto blocking at the level and playtesting it. The role of the artist is to take what has been designed and make it pretty to look at while still communicating the original intentions of the designer. As I work on this map, the blockout is acting as a guide for me and my environment artists to develop and use their art kits and to build the level into something more presentable. A designer and artist work together to fulfill the goal of communicating to the player. For example, the design of this map calls for an icy blizzard to blind the players and limit what information around them they can glean. The design calls for the player to, in moments, feel isolated and lost in the storm, but still be able to navigate themselves and not be able to wander off too far into the wilderness. So the outdoor area contains unique layouts and structures to help the player quickly reorientate themselves. You can also see the level had to be blocked off to stop the player from travelling into nowhere. Art would then come in and devise creative solutions, such as this crack in the ground. This can then lead to narrative and world building to help explain the current situation to the player. So although two separate roles, their responsibilities are intertwined and have great impact on each other. Specialities. As you begin your career path, you will find yourself most likely specialised into one specific field. This could be by accident, but nonetheless, you will find it to be beneficial to specialise. Specialising means you become the best at your one thing. You want to become the go-to person. Now, it doesn't mean you don't know anything about any other areas of your role. That doesn't change. Instead, you become an expert in your field. Someone who specialises in stylistic character art will typically mean they can also do other art styles or content as well. I've been doing this for some time now, and one thing I often get asked is, how do you find your specialism? And as corny as it sounds, it will actually find you. It could happen whilst you're looking for a job, it could happen whilst you're working at a studio. But what happens regardless is you find a passion for something. It's something you enjoy and want to pursue more of. My speciality is blueprint scripting. It wasn't something I chased, but rather fell into after playing around with it. I came from a general programming background originally, but when Unreal Engine introduced blueprint scripting, it was something I immediately attached to and began to learn more about. In a large video game studio, your specialities may become very niche. For example, an environment artist who is best at rock assets, or a programmer who lives and breathes network latency and reducing lag between players. The main thing in finding your specialism is to be open and try new ideas out. During this course, you will touch upon many aspects of games development, from level design to blueprinting, from 3D modeling to animation. It's important as creatives we put ourselves out there and discover what there is to find, and you never know, you may actually find your calling. Indie versus AAA studios. We have mentioned previously that studios come in all different shapes and sizes, and there are many labels we apply to different studios. The biggest identities in this labeling though is independent studios and AAA studios. It's a phrase thrown around a lot, but let's explain what we mean by a AAA studio. AAA is a term that refers to grading, a way to measure something and its success. In video games, this isn't 100% the case. We typically will label a studio AAA based on their size and available budgets. For example, Epic Games would be considered AAA. A AAA studio will comprise of hundreds if not thousands of employees, and with budgets that allow them to have in-house services like music, sound effects, motion capture, and much more. These bigger teams and bigger budgets will usually mean a more polished game experience with the promise of a higher return of investment. On the other side of the spectrum, we have independent studios, or colloquially known as indies. Although the term indies comes from independent, nowadays it doesn't necessarily mean the same. There are some very large studios with AAA budgets and staff that remain independent. Indies are much smaller and can sometimes be just a solo developer. As such, their budgets are a fraction of the size and their games are arguably a fraction of the scope. Because of the size, indies are far more mobile. They can make decisions quicker and afford to experiment with new game mechanics and styles, as they are typically targeting a more niche market rather than a mainstream one that a AAA studio is targeting. It's not all roses though. The downside of being indie though is because the budgets are a lot smaller, so are the returns. There are always a few exceptions of course. Minecraft began life as a small experimental indie title that went on to become a worldwide craze. The success we're seeing of indie games though is ever increasing, with platforms such as Xbox, PlayStation and Nintendo championing indie releases far more in the latest generations. As we democratize our development tools more and more, we see more studios able to develop their dream games no matter the size of their team. Unreal Engine is one such tool. It is free to use and has really opened the doors to games development and publishing so that even the smallest developer can play with the big boys in the same marketplace. Different roles in game design. Overall, the game design roles create the look and feel of the game, as well as its story and how the game will play. So let us take a look and explain the different types of design roles there are. Gameplay designer. Gameplay designers are responsible for the central part of the game experience, how it plays. They design the mechanics of the game, how high the character can jump, how long it takes to accelerate to maximum speed, or when you can gain points. They plan and define the game's structure, its rules, characters, objects, props, and vehicles, and think about the different modes of play, like a story mode or multiplayer. Gameplay designers are a bridge between the technical and art teams. If the gameplay is too difficult to achieve technically, they figure out what's possible and rewrite the specification accordingly. Likewise, if the programmers develop a game engine in a way that means new exciting things can be done, the gameplay designer works out how to incorporate those into the game. They also train testers to play the game, making sure that they understand what's expected of the finished product. Lead game designer. Lead game designers are responsible for how a game looks and what it's like to play. They work with a small team, figuring out the characters and props and what's going to happen. Then they share those ideas with the rest of the team. Once a game is being made, they make sure deadlines and budgets are met. They are the ones that decide if changes need to be made. In smaller studios, they might do a wide variety of jobs too, the art, programming and marketing. But in large studios, they would have writers, lead animators, creative directors and gameplay designers to help. Level designer. Level designers understand what makes good gameplay. They design the game, but only a portion of it, normally referred to as a level. They take the specification defined by the gameplay designer and get into the detail, the actions, events, objects, and environment. The level designer first sketches ideas on paper or using 2D drawing software. They imagine the playing experience, putting themselves in the position of the player, mapping out all the possibilities. They need to think about the logic and the flow of events and actions, the conditions that need to be met for certain things to happen, and the challenges the player will encounter along the way. User experience or a UX designer. UX designers make sure a game is nice and easy to use, as distinct from being easy to win. They ensure the players get clear and effective feedback from the game. Their main concern is that the players don't get frustrated by a game that's being badly explained. UI designers are concerned with the user interface, the point at which the game and the players interact. They create the look and feel of things like the heads-up display, or HUD, showing the score, lives, and levels. They make sure that the menus and commands are clear. In larger games companies, the UX and UI roles are done by different people, but in smaller studios, as is often the way, they are combined into one job. UX designers tend to focus more on information a player needs for the game to flow well, whereas UI designers tend to focus on how that information is communicated. They make it look good and sound great. Writers. Games writers think up the story of a game. While the artists create the look of a monster, the game's writers give the monster a name, show how it can become a monster, and why it needs to be defeated. Writing for games is a highly collaborative process. In most cases, writers will be given a loose sequence of events and locations and be told to make it work. The story of a game is the result of many people and disciplines working together with conflicting needs and goals. The game will inevitably go through many stages of iteration and change, but most of it will be out of your control or influence. Writers will have to find a way to stitch it all together in the most efficient way possible, so that the audience believes it was meant to be that way all along. There's another way in which writing for games is different from writing novels or writing for film. In games, the player contributes to the story through their interactions. Instead of telling the player a story, the writer invites the player to do things so that they will understand the story. Responsibilities. As we have mentioned previously, there are many roles to fulfill in a game's development, and we have touched upon some of the responsibilities each of these roles could have. But let's focus on the lead designer and their responsibilities. Lead game designers are responsible for how a game looks and what it's like to play. They work with a small team, figuring out the characters and props and what's going to happen. Then they share those ideas with the rest of the team. A game with amazing art or programming falls flat if the game that is showcasing this great work is unintuitive or not engaging. It's good to think of your role as a designer, it to be all about communication. Communication to other creators on your team, as well as communicating to the eventual players of your game. It is your responsibility to direct what the artists need to create and asking programmers to give you the ability to script or tweak aspects of the game. As such, to be able to communicate effectively to each team, you need to understand their role and what it entails too. It makes it a lot easier if you can speak to an artist with the jargon and knowledge of their role. For example, I had an animator working on some animations for me. They came from a film background, but developing animations for a game is very different, and a vast number of different things have to be considered, all of which were new to this animator. However, because I was versed in how animation works on a technical level, I was able to quickly explain what I needed and how it should be exported to best utilize in the game. Skill set. What does it take to be a good designer? As a designer, your number one responsibility is communicating. Therefore, a good designer would be expected to be able to communicate the vision of the game with artists, programmers, producers, and marketing staff. Although typically not a technical role, you are still expected to have a knowledge of game engines and their abilities and limitations. This keeps ideas in scope and realistic. This is why you will find many designers have come from other fields first, such as art or programming. As a designer, you also need to have great knowledge of the game's market, being aware of industry trends and be able to explain the game in that context. Industry trends are a tricky thing, especially when you're taking into account that games can sometimes take years to develop, and what was trending now may not be trending in 3 to 4 years' time. As a designer, you need to be able to analyze and extrapolate trend data and plan for where the market is heading, rather than where it is now. It should therefore go without saying, but designers need to have great imagination. You need to be able to not just imagine gameplay or mechanics when there are none yet developed, but also imagine how players may interact with your game in the future. Based on what you now know about the role of a designer, you can imagine that a designer needs to be proficient in communicating in written format as seen in game design documents, public speaking with presentation skills for pitching the game or ideas. The game designers are expected to be organised and be able to plan their time efficiently as well. Where do ideas come from? When you are a creative, ideas can come from anywhere and inspire you. Other games, films, TV shows, history, or even current world events could inspire your next game. But that isn't all. So I'm going to explain how I get my ideas. The idea for my game Mimic originally came from two things: my desire to try and make a horror game, and John Carpenter's classic sci-fi horror film, The Thing. That desire to make a horror game came from me wanting to try something new, to try something different to what I've made in the past. Even when you are working at a studio and working on a game, it's important to remain creative, even for leisure and a hobby. A new tool may have been released on Unreal Engine, and that could inspire you to experiment and try something new. One thing you should do is definitely take note of any local game exhibitions near you and visit them. Visit all the events and take a look around at what games people are making. This is important for a couple of reasons. One is to become inspired by the breadth of developers on show, but secondly is to look at current trends and what other game designers are currently working on. Another great source of inspiration is taking part in game jams. So game jams are very short development projects, sometimes 48 hours, and they are usually tied to a specific theme or limitation. These intense development projects are great for experimenting and prototyping ideas out. Many games that have been released have stemmed from just these game jams. Most take place online, but you'll also find some in person, ones which will act as great places to network with other game developers like yourself. But my biggest piece of advice is to play as many different games of different genres as you can. Try to leave your comfort zone, try something new, and you never know what ideas may come to you. Brainstorming. So now your brain is full of ideas. Inspiration has flooded your mind and your creative juices are flowing. But now what? How do we organize these thoughts and begin being productive? Now, if you're anything like me and your mind may be swimming with ideas, too many in fact, well, we need to filter them out. Figure out which ones are worth exploring or have potential. The first thing you should be doing is identifying your goal. What are you making this game for? Is it to be released to the market, to possibly pitch to a particular publisher, or to fill a gap in your knowledge or portfolio? For my game Mimic, I had two goals. Firstly, I wanted to try and make a horror game, as this was a genre I had yet tackled, but very much enjoyed as a consumer. Secondly, I wanted to expand my knowledge and experience with online multiplayer and using Epic's online services. The idea of identifying your goal still applies even if you're brainstorming a single mechanic or feature for your game as well. For example, let's say you're designing an inventory system. Is your goal for the player to have an inventory management as a gameplay feature, or is it to efficiently display their inventory contents as simple as possible? So now what I want you to do next is I want you to pause this video, and before moving on to the next one, I want you to stop and think about your ideas that you've got. Formulate these ideas somewhere, put them down on paper, use Google Docs. I personally write mine up in Google Docs, but this can also be done on pen and paper if you so wish and prefer to do so. This is a process for you, so find out what works best for you. So give us a pause. Best of luck. Pillars of game design. When we make a game, we want to first identify what we call the pillars of the game's design. Now, this could come across as quite an abstract concept at first, but I'll provide you some examples to help you understand it. When we are designing a game, we want to identify what it is we want our players to experience. What is the focus for the game and its gameplay? Think about what the players will enjoy about a game. These ideas are your pillars. So let's take an example. A game like Super Mario Odyssey is another Mario game, sure, but it has an extra element of having a focus on exploration. Not just exploration in the world, but also exploring the abilities of Mario and his new ally Cappy. The game actively rewards the player for exploring the game to its fullest, even putting rewards in places that would seem at first unreachable. So let me show you the design pillars for my game, Mimic. In Mimic, we have three pillars. Our first pillar is subterfuge, players betraying one another and ruining their chances of success. Secondly, we have paranoia. We want players to be unaware and untrusting of their peers, never being 100% sure of who is who and their intentions. And finally, we have investigation. We want the players to be exploring the map and finding problems to solve, not just remaining in a hiding place until the very end of the match. Having these pillars defined at the start is very important as it helps shape every mechanic and design decision going forwards. Originally in Mimic, we had a mechanic where the AI character could grab you and you could free yourself by sacrificing an item if you were holding one. At first, this may seem totally fine, but it felt flat and didn't maximize the usage of our pillars. So now a simple change. Instead of the original player being able to free themselves, they can now only be freed by another player hitting the AI. This introduced a fight or flight mechanic and feeds the paranoia of who you can trust and not trust in the game. Pillars are one of the first things we must decide upon. So before moving on to the next video, take a look at your brainstormed ideas and pick out what you think your pillars will be. Now remember, the pillars aren't features or mechanics specifically, but more about ideas and themes that you want these mechanics and features to actually play towards. So best of luck, look forward to seeing your results. Market research. During the game's development, we are constantly doing research, not just at the start, but throughout its lifespan. And there are three areas we usually conduct research in. Our first one is in market research. Market research is the act of looking at the past, present, and future releases. You are looking at what games are doing well commercially and or critically, trying to identify trends between the games or even gaps in the market. So let's say you want to do an action game. Then it's best to look at the action games and see what they are doing now in terms of their combat design or systems. This is why you will commonly see games come out after witnessing the success of new types of games. A great example of this is the Souls-like games. Action games with punishing and deterministic combat associated with difficult encounters. Named after Dark Souls and Demon Souls, many other development studios attempted to make their own versions of these games. Trends, though, extend beyond just genres and can actually be tracked in mechanics specifically. For example, many games in the past popularized the idea of climbing a tower or high position and unlocking many icons for the player to investigate, collect, or complete. However, that trend is now phasing into the idea of the player still reaching these high vantage points, but being able to add their own icons and points of interest to the world and the map. A good place to see what games are doing well with audiences is YouTube, Twitch, and other streaming services. You can see what games are resonating well with the market and how they are being consumed. Identifying your target market will allow you to better market your game and approach the most suitable publishers for your game idea. Audience research. Whilst conducting your market research, you will find it inevitable to be looking at the audiences too. We look at audiences and try to identify gameplay habits. How do players play their games, and what do we know about these players? It is a common error for people getting started in games development to say their game is designed for everyone. This isn't true for any game. We want to identify who our audience are and target the game towards them. We need to look at game playing habits. This can also vary by demographics of the player too, such as their age, geographic location, and platform. For example, My Game Mimic is an online multiplayer survival horror game with social deduction gameplay. The genre is a popular streaming and social media genre. So therefore, we've designed the game with Twitch support and other features that can better support content creators. Understanding your audience and their likes and dislikes will also make it more efficient for marketing plans too, as it means you can target your advertising spend far more accurately and save yourself some money. Technical research. At the start of any project, there is a period of research and development. This is a time where we prototype ideas and assess their feasibility. When we're brainstorming an idea, we want to identify what elements are new to us and investigate the workflow behind it. For example, you could be trialing out a new art style and want to experiment with it and see how applicable it is for your game's design. We will often look at shared practice too in the form of talks and articles written by our peers. This is often more important at the start of development to help evaluate a potential idea, especially if an idea was inspired by a new technological example or tool. The games industry as a whole is very good at sharing what we learn from others, and most of it is free for everyone to consume. There is a wealth of information on Unreal developer community, including guides written by Epic staff and the community. When we're first starting out, we're usually creating these sort of empty spaces inside our projects as we try our new ideas out, see what works, what doesn't work. And it helps us save a lot of time in the long run, as it makes us not want to waste time doing something wrong instead of making sure we do it right off the bat. Identifying scope. How do you know if the game you have dreamt up is too big or ambitious? This is a question that plagues all new game developers, and in some cases, better ones too. It's important that we avoid overscoping an idea to avoid it growing too big and out of our ability to complete. There are lots of reasons why something may fall out of scope. Firstly, a game idea may prove to be too difficult or even impossible technologically to pull off. Secondly, the idea may be possible but could cost way too much in resources, such as staffing, time, and money. Thirdly, the idea or game mechanic may fall outside of the original brief or intent. We often call this feature creeping, a term used for when during development we add features to a game or mechanic rather than being planned for. Doing this will quickly balloon development costs and time. Now, it can be difficult to identify when an idea on paper may be outside of your available skill set, especially when you are starting out in games development. In time, as you gain experience, you'll have a better judgment about your own abilities and the abilities of those around you. But until then, how do we assess this? Your first game or games should be simple. And a simple game is a game based around a single mechanic. What you want to avoid is complicating your design with too many systems, especially if those systems interact with one another. For example, RPG games are difficult to create for this reason. When starting out as an indie or hobbyist game developer, you should also want to avoid a multiplayer game, as these can be difficult to not just create, but to also test effectively, as testing an online multiplayer game would typically require multiple machines and accounts. Scope is one of the reasons why we do so much technical research at the beginning to help us ascertain what is currently possible. And if an idea doesn't seem possible now, or doesn't fit with your current pillars, it isn't gone forever. You just shelf it, possibly for even your next game. What is the aim of balancing a game? As a video game player, you may already be familiar with the term of game balance, but what does it actually mean? One of your responsibilities as a game designer is balancing the game. Now, this doesn't mean just applying balancing to an online multiplayer game. Game balance is used for all games. If we are making a multiplayer game, it may refer to the fairness and balance of different characters and weapons. However, we would also look at the balance of difficulty in a single player game too. For the most part, we don't want to frustrate the players with random spikes of difficulty. We usually want to start the game or level relatively easier in difficulty. This is because we are still teaching the player how to play the game and how to build up their skills and knowledge. But how do we actually balance that game though? What do we actually have to do? Well, during the development, we want to have people testing the game frequently. You're looking at how they are playing the game and where they are encountering trouble. To aid in balancing a game, we would ask the programmer to put in public, editable variables where we can adjust the values to fine-tune elements of the game design. Don't like a little bit of the player's speed, you can slightly adjust it. Jump height, adjust that too. For example, in this Unreal Engine project, I have made settings available that adjust the damage a cannon will do to the targets. This means I can fine tune and adjust my cannons to deal the right amount of damage at the right time, even when I can make the cannons later on in the game deal more damage, be more threatening to the player. And my game would be filled with these little dials, switches, and levers that I can tweak and adjust to get the game exactly how I want it to be. How to be fair to the player. Balancing a game is hard. We must account for different types of players with all varying degrees of experience. So, how do we remain fair to the player when we want to provide challenge for them without frustrating them? Firstly, what is frustration in terms of players? If a player fails in a game, the player needs to be able to learn from that failure and be able to assess how to improve for their next attempt. So when they do fail, they must be aware of why they failed. Maybe they were too impatient, or maybe they weren't prepared enough. When a player character dies in Dark Souls, the player is usually very much aware of why they failed and what they need to try different next time. We don't want them to be unfairly biased by the AI either. It is actually far easier to make the AI always achieve a headshot against a player if we wanted it to, but that wouldn't be any fun for the player. So instead, we are giving the player the opportunity to succeed. For example, in many action games, enemies that are behind you or out of camera sight are going to be less likely to attack you, because if they did, the player wouldn't be able to see it coming and react. We also give the player better chances too. For example, when a player is attacked by an attack which would have them killed outright, the player is typically left with a single health point. This makes the player not only feel like they've only just survived and increased that tension, it also gives them an opportunity to make things right. The games you played are filled with these types of mechanics to make the player feel that the game is fair, and it's worth looking around for more information about game design tricks that developers put into their games. How to keep players engaged. We live in a world where players can refund their games within 2 hours of purchase, and games that are pitched as live service games, keeping players engaged in the game are very important to the success and longevity of a game. We call this retention. Retaining players in our games is a key goal for any designer. There are numerous techniques to try, and a lot of them may seem familiar to you, as they are often favoured by studios. Seasonal content is a very popular system to keep players coming back as they come back to check out new content that has been added. We can also reward the player for their playtime, so the more they play, the more they unlock. This is a popular system popularised by Fortnite's Battle Pass, a system where players earn cosmetic rewards over time. But these examples are methods for the overall game. How do we keep players engaged in the current level, for example, or gameplay? In terms of level design, we want to ensure the player has peaks and valleys of tension. We want to avoid the player having constant action. The player needs time in between challenges to reflect and recompose themselves. In gameplay, we take a similar approach to the Battle Pass systems, where we reward the player with their time played. As the player plays the game and makes progress, we want to reward them for their time and effort. This could be new weaponry, different enemy types, or even an exciting cutscene. This should happen through the gameplay though, to make the player feel like they are constantly getting rewarded for their time and effort. How do we entertain players? So we've got our players into the game, so how do we entertain them once we've got them in? The trick is to constantly surprise them with variety and new ideas. This could be in the form of new enemy types, locations, weapons, or mechanics. By changing up the game frequently, we are providing the player variety and keeping it fresh for them. The current level they are playing shouldn't feel like the previous one, or even the next one. It should be unique. In Titanfall 2, players in one level would be running through a map being constructed as they travel through it. And in the next level, they are now time travelling and fighting between past and present. This is an extreme example, but let's look at a different one. In Mario Kart, we see new level designs and unique artwork that can also introduce interesting and possibly more challenging track layouts. Variety keeps the player on their toes and unable to fall into muscle memory too fast, as they must relearn their gameplay or learn more about their surroundings. It's this variety that keeps the players engaged and entertained during our games. What is a design methodology? A design methodology is simply the steps you take and the order in which you take them to get through a project to create the final game. Design processes are double layered. First, how you structure your design project, then how you decide when and what work you should be doing within that structure. There are a number of ways to organise your work. Some are more flexible than others, allowing you to pick and choose what and when you carry out certain activities. Others come in their own methodology built in. Most game studios will say that they follow an agile development methodology, but there are a number of ways to approach the problem that is games development. And in the next few videos, we'll take a look at a few of these. Games development is much like film and follows the three phases of pre-production, production, and post-production. In pre-production, games are planned, concept art is drawn up, and the idea of the game comes to fruition. As well as designing the game and its content, plans are drawn up for how the production will proceed and how it will be managed. The production phase is by far the largest and is where the game is taken from paper to screen and be playable by your hands. The length of time a game remains in production depends on many factors, such as the scope of the game and the available resources for the game. And finally, post-production for a game is the final phase, and in the modern era of video games being always connected to the internet and perpetually playable, we find ourselves in situations where games require post-release patches and fixes. Some games will continue with extra content, whereas some will focus on marketing and community efforts. The waterfall methodology. For a considerable amount of time, games have been planned and developed using the waterfall methodology. In this method, the next stage of the procedure will not begin until the one that came before it has been completed. This in-depth and structured analysis is the first step of the waterfall process. After that comes the designing, developing, and quality assurance testing. Finally, after all of that, you go live, repair any defects after release, and the job is over. It sounds reasonable, but this might be the most accurate manner of project execution for some projects. However, it might be different for others, mainly when dealing with a far more complex product. Generally, the waterfall technique is connected with a step-by-step activity in the project, a more formal style of managing the workflow, and a lot of bureaucracy. The fixed scope, which is presented in the form of paperwork and is accepted by decision makers, is one of the defining characteristics of this strategy. This strategy may be successful in relatively consistent markets, but as games are becoming more reactive to community feedback and ongoing trends, that consistency is less and less prevalent. The difficulty comes when you revise your project and decide to make some alterations. It is necessary to take a step back and make modifications to the project documentation as well as the code, which is not an option that is beneficial to the budget. Moreover, the time of development is significantly prolonged. Therefore, the work is already doomed to fail if you end up with a game that is cohesive with documentation but needs to be updated and needs further adjustment. Agile method. The significant drawbacks of the waterfall methodology served as a primary push for conducting a more in-depth investigation of the various techniques for development of video games. Agile approaches are a more flexible way to create and efficiently launch new applications, and the name comes from the word agile. The strategy taken here emphasizes the formation of self-organized and cross-functional teams. As a result, the amount of paperwork is much reduced, and the time it takes to make decisions has been significantly shortened. Because the final product is not assembled all at once, the development process follows an evolutionary path regarding its execution. Iterations are minor components that make up the application's overall process. Following each iteration, which is referred to as a sprint, the team and the customers can observe not only the progression of the work, but also the results of their efforts. A checkup of this kind helps plan the activities for the subsequent iteration. It is essential to note that if any part of the solution or feature needs to be modified, the sprint planning will consider that. In addition, a designer can respond to what is occurring in the market and make any necessary adjustments with fewer severe repercussions for his financial plan. These are how agile techniques tame the change and make it less expensive than it would be under a waterfall fixed scope. Agile, though, does come with its own drawbacks. Documentation is usually limited, and the output is often fragmented, with different parts of the game feeling very different from other sections of the game. Because it requires less upfront planning, it makes it very easy for feature creep to set in, with new features and adjustments being added to the project. Because of this, it makes measuring the progress of a project sometimes difficult. Double diamond. The double diamond is a visual model to understand the process of design. Its near universal appeal arises from the simple focus on both the problem and the solution. This process model is an excellent tool for making sense of design. It's also quite useful for communicating some of the thinking behind newer types of design, UX design, product design, and service design. All these new fields share something in common. They all work on problems and solutions. So the big idea is in the double diamond is that the problem is just as important as the solution. Designers are commonly known as problem solvers. Designers won't argue that point because we do solve problems. We do more than that, however, and the double diamond shows two distinctive activities in design: problem finding and problem solving. The great thing about double diamond is that even if you've never heard of it, you're probably already using it. This process model has endured the test of time because it's simple and it communicates how the design process feels. What is a work pipeline? A pipeline is a systematic and visual representation of a process or workflow involving multiple stages, each representing a step towards a desired outcome. It is commonly used in various industries and in contexts to manage and track the progress of tasks, projects, or workflows from the initiation to completion. Using a pipeline offers several advantages in managing processes. Firstly, it provides efficient workflow management. Pipelines provide a clear and structured framework for managing complex workflows. By breaking down the process into stages, businesses can streamline operations, allocate resources effectively, and ensure tasks progress smoothly towards completion. Pipelines allow for better planning and organization of tasks or projects. With a visual representation of each stage, businesses can quickly identify dependencies, set realistic timelines, and allocate resources accordingly. This helps in avoiding bottlenecks and ensuring timely project delivery. Pipelines also facilitate collaboration among team members by providing a shared understanding of the workflow and its progress. With a centralized system that everyone can access, team members can stay informed, collaborate seamlessly, and work together towards achieving common goals. By visualizing the pipeline, businesses gain better visibility into the status of tasks or projects. This enables team leaders and stakeholders to monitor progress, identify potential issues or delays, and take proactive measures to keep the workflow on track. It also promotes accountability among team members as they can clearly see their responsibilities and deadlines. To effectively manage a pipeline, consider the following best practices. Number 1. Define clear stages. Clearly define the stages of your pipeline that align with the specific process or workflow. Each stage should represent a significant milestone or logical progression towards a desired outcome. 2. Standardize your processes. Establish a standardized processes and guidelines for each stage of the pipeline. This ensures consistency, minimizes errors, and enables smoother transitions between stages. 3. Regularly monitor and update. Continuously monitor the progress of tasks or projects within that pipeline. Regularly update the pipeline to reflect the latest information and changes, such as completed tasks, pending activities, or any modifications to the workflow. 4. Encourage communication and collaboration. Foster open communication and collaboration among your team members involved in the pipeline. Promote transparency, encourage sharing of updates or challenges, and facilitate knowledge exchange to ensure smooth handoffs between the stages. Utilize technology and automation. Leverage appropriate technology and automation tools to streamline your pipeline management. Task management software, project management platforms, or workflow automation tools can help simplify tracking, improve efficiency, and reduce manual effort. Finally, analyze and optimize. Continuously analyze your pipeline's performance to identify areas for improvement. Collect and analyze data, metrics, or key performance indicators such as KPIs related to the pipeline to identify bottlenecks, optimize processes, and enhance it overall. Identifying the target market. Identifying the ideal target audience for your game comes with a world of benefits for studios and publishers, all with the end result of saving time and resources. If you can pinpoint your game's ideal target audience early in the development process, your team can achieve a number of inviolable outcomes. Finding the ideal target audience is crucial for new games. It positively influences every aspect of game design and development by ensuring alignment with the player's motivations. It informs effective marketing and promotional strategies, and vastly increasing the chances of commercial success. It also allows for optimal resource allocation, reducing the risk of wasted efforts and financial losses. Additionally, understanding the ideal target audience is essential for building a robust gaming community, which enhances player engagement and loyalty. It lets you plan from a forward-looking strategic vantage point, letting studios get ahead of market trends and reach new players. In short, knowing your audience is not only vital for immediate success, but also for maintaining growth and relevance in the gaming industry. A video game's ideal target audience is a specific group of players characterized by unique psychological traits that align closely with the game's design, themes, and overall experience. These players are the ones that are most likely to engage with, enjoy, and spend money within the game. What's important to note though is a demographic is not an audience. A game's broad demographics, often simplified as age group, gender, and genre, offer a limited set of parameters when it comes to defining your target audience. In today's saturated market, it isn't enough. To find a target audience, you need to get to the core of who that audience is. Given that demographics alone don't provide game designers and developers with a comprehensive understanding of their target audience, it's important to redefine our understanding of what an audience is. This broadened perspective can lead to increased potential for creating exceptional and successful games. The first task is to identify the emotional core of what your audience desires. To do this, understand who they are at their core. Do they seek relaxation, socialization, competition? Who are their companions? What are their values, habits, and passions? How do you describe their personalities? What other games are they resonating with them, and why? So before moving ahead, have a sit down and think about the game ideas that you've got in your mind, and think about who your target audience for those games are. Make notes of them, jot them down, and prepare them ready for our next tasks. SWOT analysis. So you've got an idea, but you don't know if it's a good one. So we use something called a SWOT. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so a SWOT analysis is a technique for assessing these four aspects of your design. SWOT analysis is a tool that can help you to analyze what your design does best now and to devise a successful strategy for the future. SWOT can also uncover areas of the design that are holding you back, or that your competitors could exploit if you don't protect yourself. A SWOT analysis examines both internal and external factors. That is, what's going on inside and outside of your organization. So some of these factors will be within your control and some won't. In either case, the wisest action you can take in response will become clearer once you've discovered, recorded, and analyzed as many factors as you can. A SWOT analysis can help you to challenge risky assumptions and to uncover dangerous blind spots about your organization's performance. If you use it carefully and collaboratively, it can deliver new insights on where your business currently is and help you to develop exactly the right strategy for any situation. For example, you may be well aware of some of your organization's strengths, but until you record them alongside weaknesses and threats, you might not realize how unreliable those strengths actually are. Pitch decks. Pitch decks are also known as marketing decks and are primarily used by businesses trying to convince clients or investors to work with them. They're short presentations to help someone else learn about your business quickly. The primary goal of a pitch deck isn't to close a deal, rather it's to convince a separate party, whether it's an investor or a client, to continue the conversation with you about your business. In terms of game development, that usually means pitching to a publisher or an investor. Pitch decks consist of slides that provide a short summary of your game, business plan, and vision. However, it's much more complicated than that. While you may have a lot to say about your game and the reasons why someone else should work with you, your pitch decks need to be kept relatively short. Pitch decks can be presented or sent to potential investors and clients via email. Presenting your pitch deck is typically the best way to ensure a potential partner has read through all the slides. It also gives you the opportunity to answer any immediate questions that they may have. So you will often make two kinds of pitch decks. The first is usually shared via email and reviewed by investors on their own. Because of that, the content is a little bit more text and information heavy. The second is made for in-person presentation. This version of the presentation will have far more visual elements to keep people focused and engaged, with more information being spoken out loud. Your focus with the pitch deck shouldn't be to close a deal, but to keep the conversation going. Every pitch deck will be different depending on your game and who is the intended audience. However, all pitch decks must have a few key elements to be successful. Here is what you should include in your pitch deck. Every pitch deck must include an introduction about your game. The very first slide should tell your audience who you are and what the game is. As part of your introduction to the game, you should identify your game pillars for the audience. You then go into your game idea into more detail, and if you have them, show pictures of your game in action with mechanic descriptions. Next, you'll want to spend some time talking about who the game is for, identifying your target market. This is crucial because you want to show that there is a target market for the game, and it can also help you settle your design decisions. Presenting a pitch deck. Remember, your in-person presentation can be modified or extended version of your emailed deck, just with less text and detail to make it more visually engaging. Though the emailed pitch got your foot in the door, the in-person pitch is where you'll most likely make a good true first impression. Like the email deck, it should be well edited and organized. So think strategically about the information you present. Provide enough details so your audience will want to know more. So your in-person presentation should be thorough without veering into fine details. This can be tricky. Use a clean, visually engaging and professional design. Make your slides simple and where text is needed, easy to read. Keep in mind that if there's too much text on your slides, your audience may be distracted from your pitch by having them read while listening. Be sure to leave time for your potential investors to ask questions at the end of your presentation. It's important to make a unique and impassioned pitch to encourage investors and to bring energy to your presentation. Show off the authenticity and originality of your work by incorporating elements of design and videos and pictures of your game in action if you have this available to you. Make it easy for your potential investors to consider your ideas. Keep simplicity in mind, make your slides easy to read, no blocks of text or tiny numbers, and keep your industry jargon to a minimum, as not everyone you speak to may be familiar. For example, if you have an idea for creating a new mechanic, detailing the programming or technical aspects may not speak to your audience. However, explaining how the mechanic will fit into the game and why it is a talking point will be. Iterative development. Iterative development is a methodology in games development where the process of building a game is divided into small segments called iterations. Each iteration is a mini project that includes planning, designing, coding, and testing, and it typically results in a small but complete piece of the final product. Here are a few characteristics and benefits of iterative development. Number 1. Small increments. Development is broken down into smaller, more manageable parts. Each part is developed and refined in cycles. 2. Feedback driven. Each iteration is reviewed and assessed, allowing for feedback and adjustments before moving on to the next iteration. 3. Evolutionary design. The design evolves as a product is developed. Initial designs are improved based on the outcomes of each iteration. 4. Incremental refinement. Features and functionalities are gradually built up and refined through successive iterations. 5. Frequent testing. Testing occurs in every iteration, ensuring that issues are identified and addressed early. Iterative development allows for continuous improvement and adaptation, making it a preferred approach for many software development projects. It helps teams manage complexity, incorporate user feedback, and deliver high-quality software in a controlled and predictable manner. Working in a team. A video game development team works together through a structured and collaborative process that involves multiple disciplines and roles. Effective communication, project management, and use of collaborative tools are key to ensuring the smooth operation of a development team. Here's how a video game development team typically works together. Firstly, team structure and roles. As we've already discussed in previous videos, there are core team members. One such is the game designers, who define the game's concept, mechanics, story, and overall vision, with the programmers or developers who write the code that implements the game's features and mechanics, and artists who create visual assets, including character designs, environments, animations, and UI elements. And as we previously mentioned, there are a ton more different roles available to game development industry. All of these work together in producing a final product. 2. Development phases. As we also mentioned, there are multiple stages and phases of development. First up is the conceptual phase, the pre-production phase. We do brainstorming. The team collaborates on the game concept, defining the core idea, target audience, and key features, and then producing the documentation, such as the game design document or outlining the game's vision and design. Part of pre-production is the prototyping, developers creating prototypes to test core gameplay features and planning detailed project plans, including timelines, milestones, and resource allocation. We then go into a production phase where we create the assets. Artists and sound designers produce the game's visual and audio assets. Development also involves the programs implementing the game's features, mechanics, and systems. And then finally integrating it all together with the assets and the code into one game with a continuous testing and iteration. Towards the end of the life cycle of the project, we enter a testing and polishing phase, where QA testers are regularly testing the game to find and report bugs and issues, and also bug fixing. So developers fix reported issues and the game is polished to improve performance and user experience. The game is then launched and released to the public, but then we also support the game post-launch with the team providing updates, patches, and additional content based on the player feedback. 3. Communication and collaboration. So teams have regular meetings. One of the most popular ones that you see in studios are stand-up meetings. These are short daily meetings where team members discuss what they did yesterday, what they plan to do today, and if there are any blockers that they face. Sprint planning is another meeting type, and this happens at the beginning of each development cycle or a sprint to plan the tasks and set the goals. This is typically reserved for those who are working in an agile methodology, which is most studios. And then finally, retrospectives, post-sprint meetings to review what went well, what didn't, and how processes can be improved. In a team, we also use a number of collaborative tools like Jira, Trello, and Asana to help manage tasks, track progress, and assign responsibilities. We also use different version control systems like Git, Perforce, or SVN are often used as source control, allowing multiple team members to work on a project simultaneously without any conflicts. We also communicate via different platforms. Slack, Microsoft Teams, or Discord are all used to facilitate real-time communication and collaboration. 4. Workflow and methodologies. We've already covered a lot about workflow and methodologies, and they all tie into teamwork. We have agile development, where it's an iterative process where development is broken into small, manageable iterations or sprints, allowing for regular assessment and adaptation. This requires it to be flexible, like a Scrum or Kanban, enable teams to respond quickly to changes and feedback. There's also task management. So breaking down tasks, large tasks are broken down to smaller ones, manageable tasks with clear objectives and deadlines. We also prioritize them based on their importance and deadlines, ensuring critical features and issues are addressed first. 5. Feedback and iteration. During the game's development, we have internal testing going on all the time. Team members and QA testers are playing the game to provide feedback and identify issues early. We then may also use external testing, beta testing with external players to gather broader feedback and identify areas for improvement. We also have this idea of continuous improvement with a feedback loop. Regular feedback is incorporated into the development process, allowing for continuous improvement and refinement of the game. In conclusion, a video game development team works together through a well-structured process involving clear roles, effective communication, and collaborative tools. By following a phased development approach and using methodologies like Agile, teams can ensure that they can create high quality games that meet their vision and player expectations. Source control. Source control, also known as version control, is a system used in video game development to manage and track changes to the game's code or assets and other project files. It is essential for collaborative development, ensuring that multiple team members can work on the project simultaneously without conflicts or data loss. Here are some key aspects and benefits of using source control in a video game development. For version tracking, we have history tracking. Source control systems maintain a history of all the changes made to the project files, allowing developers to see what changes were made, when, and by whom. We also have revisions. So each change or set of changes is assigned a unique revision number or identifier, making it easy to track and reference specific updates. Branching and merging are key aspects of source control. With branches, developers can create branches to work on new features, bug fixes, or experiments without affecting the main project, often referred to as the main line or the trunk. Once changes are tested and validated, they can be then merged back into the main branch, integrating the new code or assets into the primary project. This often leads to conflict resolution. So conflicts are when multiple developers make changes to the same file. Conflicts can occur. So source control systems provide tools to resolve these conflicts, ensuring that all changes are correctly integrated. We also have diff tools. So these tools compare different versions or files to highlight changes and assist in resolving those conflicts. Source control systems enable multiple developers to work on the project simultaneously, coordinating their efforts and avoiding overwriting each other's work. Part of that team collaboration is access control. So permissions and access controls can be set to manage who can read or modify specific parts of a project. One of the big benefits of source control, though, is its backup and recovery. It provides a safety net. Source control acts as a safety net, allowing developers to revert to previous versions if a new change introduces bugs or issues. And in the case of a disaster, data loss or corruption, the source control repository provides a reliable backup. Part of source control is also the audit trail. This involves accountability. So the history of changes provides an audit trail, making it easy to identify who made changes and why, which is useful for debugging and project management. When working on a project, you have to commit these changes to the branch. And when you do so, you can use a commit message. And commit messages can serve as documentation, explaining the purpose of each change and providing context. So one thing that really works really well with source control is that source control systems are often integrated with continuous integration or CI tools. These automatically build and test the game whenever new changes are committed, ensuring that the project remains stable. Part of quality assurance is automated testing and build processes to help catch issues early, improving the overall quality of the game. A big part of source control is efficient workflow. By having parallel development, teams can work on different features or components in parallel, speeding up the development process. With branches, we can allow developers to isolate new features or experimental changes until they are ready for production, reducing the risk of introducing unstable code into the main project. So some common source control systems, you've probably heard of Git, a distributed version control system widely used in game development industry. Popular platforms that use Git include GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket. Perforce or Helix Core is a centralized version control system known for its performance with large binary files, making it popular for large game development studios. We also have Subversion, or SVN, another centralized version control system, although it has become less popular with the rise of distributed systems like Git. So in conclusion, source control is a fundamental practice in video game development, enabling efficient collaboration, robust version tracking, and enhanced project stability. By using source control systems, development teams can manage complex projects more effectively, ensuring that the final product meets quality standards and is delivered on time. Project roadmaps. Project roadmaps in video game development are high-level strategic planning tools that outline the key phases, milestones, and goals of a game development project over time. They provide a visual representation of the project's timeline, helping teams align their efforts, track progress, and communicate the project status to stakeholders. Here's an in-depth look at what project roadmaps entail and how they are used in video game development. So first, let's talk about the key components of a project roadmap. Phases. So we have a concept phase, which is the initial brainstorming and idea validation. We then go on to the pre-production, planning, prototyping, and initial design work, leading into production with full-scale development, asset creation, and feature implementation, alpha beta testing, extensive testing, and bug fixing, leading into launch, which is the final preparations and release of the game, and obviously post-launch for ongoing support, updates, and content expansions. Secondly, we have milestones. These are significant points in a project timeline where specific goals or deliverables are achieved. Examples include prototype completion, alpha release, beta testing phase, and final release. 3. Goals and objectives. Clear, actionable goals for each phase and milestone. Objectives might include completing core gameplay mechanics, achieving a certain level of graphical fidelity, or reaching a specific stage in user testing. This is a chronological representation of the project phases and milestones, often displayed as a Gantt chart or similar visual timeline to show the sequence and duration of tasks. Identification of tasks and milestones that depend on the completion of other tasks. It helps in understanding the workflow and managing bottlenecks. Mapping out which team members and resources will be needed at different stages of development. It ensures that all aspects of the project are adequately staffed and resourced. So there are many benefits of project roadmaps. Firstly, alignment and focus. It keeps the entire development team aligned on the project's goals and timeline. It helps maintain focus on the critical path and ensures that everyone is working towards the same objectives. It also is a clear communication tool. It provides a clear and concise way to communicate the project's progress and plans to stakeholders, including team members, management, investors, and publishers. It helps in setting expectations and managing stakeholder engagement. It also helps us identify potential risks and bottlenecks early in the project. It allows the team to develop mitigation strategies and contingency plans. It also helps us in monitoring the progress of a project against the planned timeline. It facilitates regular reviews and adjustments to keep the project on track. And it also informs strategic decisions by providing a clear view of the project's status and future plans, helping in prioritizing tasks and allocating resources effectively. So how do we actually go about creating a project roadmap? Well, first of all, you want to define the scope. Start by clearly defining the scope of your project, including the main features, target platforms, and overall vision for the game. Secondly, we are going to identify key phases and milestones. Break down the development process into key phases and identify major milestones within each phase. Thirdly, set goals and objectives. Establish clear, immeasurable goals for each phase and milestone, ensuring that they align with the overall project scope and vision. Number 4, establish a timeline. Create a timeline that maps out the phases, milestones, and goals. Ensure the timeline is realistic and accounts for potential delays and iterations. 5. Allocate your resources. Determine the resources such as team members, budget, and tools needed for each phase and allocate them accordingly. Adjust resource allocation as needed based upon your project progress and changes. 6. Identify your dependencies and risks. Map out dependencies between tasks and milestones. Identify potential risks and develop mitigation strategies. And finally, keep the roadmap up to date with regular reviews and adjustments based on the project progress and feedback. Use the roadmap as a living document that evolves with the project. Now, there are a number of tools for helping you create these project roadmaps. You have professional project management software like Jira, Trello, Asana, or even Monday.com can be used to create and manage project roadmaps. Gantt charts can also be made using visual tools like Microsoft Project or Gantt Pro to provide detailed timelines and track progress. And finally, there's collaboration platforms. Platforms like Notion, Confluence, or Miro for collaborative planning and documentation. In conclusion, project roadmaps are essential in video game development for guiding the team through complex and multifaceted process of creating a game. They provide a structured plan, facilitate communication, manage risks, and track progress, ensuring the project stays on course and meets its objectives. By regularly updating and reviewing the roadmap, development teams can adapt to changes and continue to work efficiently towards a successful completion of the game. Prototyping. Producing prototypes is a crucial step in creating a video game for several reasons. Prototyping helps developers validate ideas, identify potential issues, and refine gameplay mechanics before committing significant resources to full-scale development. Here are some key reasons why prototyping is important in a video game development. Number 1. Validating your game concepts. Prototypes allow developers to test whether a game concept is feasible and can be effectively implemented. It demonstrates the core mechanics and ideas of the game work as intended and are engaging. 2. Iterative development. Prototyping enables developers to gather feedback from team members, stakeholders, and potential players early in the development process. Iterating on prototypes helps refine gameplay mechanics, controls, and features based on feedback, leading to a more polished final product. Number 3. Risk mitigation. Early prototypes can reveal technical, design, and gameplay issues that might not be evident in the planning stages. By identifying and addressing problems early, prototypes help avoid costly mistakes and rework later in a development process. Number 4. Experimentation and innovation. Prototyping allows developers to experiment with different ideas, mechanics, and design approaches without the pressures of full-scale production. It encourages innovative thinking and exploration of new and unique gameplay experiences. Number 5. Communication tool. Prototypes serve as a tangible representation of ideas, helping team members understand the vision and objectives of the game. Demonstrating a working prototype can help secure buy-in from stakeholders, investors, and publishers by showcasing the potential of the game. Number 6. Technical validation. Prototypes can be used to test the technical performance of the game, such as frame rates, loading times, and responsiveness. It helps determine if the chosen game engine and development tools are suitable for the project's needs. Number 7. Gameplay and mechanics testing. It ensures that the core gameplay mechanics are fun, intuitive, and engaging, allowing for early testing and balancing of game elements such as difficulty levels, character abilities, and progression systems. Number 8. User experience and interface design. Prototypes can be used to test and refine the user interface and user experience, ensuring the game is accessible and enjoyable for all players. Observing how players interact with the prototype provides insights into potential improvements and enhancements. Number 9. Market testing. Early prototypes can be used for market testing with a target audience to gauge interest and gather valuable feedback on what works and what doesn't. A working prototype can be used in early marketing efforts to generate interest and excitement around the game. And finally, number 10. The foundation for development. A well-developed prototype serves as a strong foundation for the full-scale development of the game. The lessons learned and feedback gathered from the prototype can inform detailed design documents and project plans. Prototyping is an essential practice in video game development that helps validate ideas, refine gameplay, and mitigate risks. It allows for experimentation and iteration, ensuring that the final product is both technically sound and enjoyable for players. By investing time and effort in creating prototypes, developers can enhance the quality of their games and increase the likelihood of success in a highly competitive market. The game design document. A game design document, or GDD, is a detailed living document that serves as the blueprint for the development of a video game. It outlines the game's concept, mechanics, story, characters, world, art, style, sound, and other critical aspects. Here are some of the primary components typically included in a GDD. The first section of your GDD is an introduction. It's here where you have the name of the game, what type of genre it is, so if it's an RPG, an FPS, a platformer. You'll also probably dictate what kind of platform you want to release the game on. Is it going to be a PC game, consoles, or a mobile game? Next, we go through the game overview. Here you will have a brief summary of the game, capturing its essence in a few key sentences. Alongside that, you'll also include the key features, unique selling points or standout features of the game, as well as describe the target audience, the demographic the game is aimed at. In the next section, you'll go into detail for the gameplay mechanics, such as the core gameplay loop. What are the primary activities and goals the player will engage with repeatedly throughout the game? What is the control scheme? How does the player interact with the game? What are the rules and objectives? The rules governing the gameplay and the player's objectives throughout. You then may have a section all about the story and the characters. So what is the narrative, the main storyline and its progression throughout the game? Who are the characters? The detailed description of the main characters, including their backgrounds, motivations, and roles in the overall story. You may also include information about the world or the setting, the game's universe, including locations, environments, and their significance to the story. You'll also have a section about level design. And in these levels, you'll have descriptions of the various levels or stages within the game, including maps, objectives, and key events. Talk about the pacing of it, so how the difficulty and complexity of levels increase as the player progresses. And you also talk about the art and aesthetics of the levels. So what is the visual style of the game? What is the artistic direction, including color schemes, themes, and graphical style? It's here where you may include things like concept art for these environments and also for the characters, which you may actually include in the narrative. We then talk about the sound and music. So there are going to be sound effects, descriptions of your in-game sounds and their purpose in the game, and the music. What style of music is your game going to have? What are the key tracks? And how the music will be used to enhance the game's atmosphere? In the section dedicated for the user interface and the user experience, here you'll have layouts and functions of the menus, heads-up displays, and other UI elements. You'll talk about how the game ensures an engaging and accessible experience for the players via their user experience. You'll also talk about the technical specifications. So what is the game engine and tools used for development? What are the target performance metrics such as frame rate and resolution? You'll also then talk about marketing and monetization. What are the plans for promoting the game, the pricing model, and any in-game purchases or monetization strategies? Your GDD may also include a production plan. In the plan, you'll have a timeline, including development milestones and deadlines. You'll outline the roles and responsibilities of your team members. Provide estimated costs and budget breakdown of your budget. The GDD is a collaborative document, constantly updated and refined throughout the development process to ensure all team members are aligned and the project's vision is maintained. How do you use a GDD? Game design documents are essential tools in the game development process, serving multiple purposes and stakeholders throughout the game's lifecycle. Here's how we use them. Firstly, the GDD acts as a comprehensive blueprint for the game, detailing every aspect from gameplay mechanics to storylines, ensuring all team members have a clear understanding of the game's vision and objectives. It helps maintain consistency in design, art, sound, and other elements, preventing feature creep and ensuring all parts of the game align with the original vision. The GDD serves as a communication tool among team members, including designers, developers, artists, sound engineers, and writers, ensuring everyone is on the same page. Team members can refer to the GDD for clarifications, provide feedback, and suggest iterations, making it easier to track and implement changes systematically. Project managers will use the GDD to set development milestones, allocate resources, and establish deadlines, ensuring the project stays on schedule. It helps in defining roles and responsibilities, allowing team members to understand their tasks and how they fit into the overall project. A well-crafted GDD can be presented to stakeholders, investors, and publishers to showcase the game's concept, scope, and potential, often aiding in securing funding or support. The document can be used by marketing and PR teams to create promotion materials and strategies that align with the game's vision and unique selling points. The GDD serves as a historical record of the game's development process, documenting decisions, changes, and evolution of the game's design. It can be referenced when troubleshooting issues or planning updates and expansions, ensuring new content or patches align with the original design. When onboarding new team members, the GDD provides them with a comprehensive understanding of the game's design, helping them quickly get up to speed. It also serves as an educational tool, demonstrating best practices in game design and development. QA teams use the GDD to develop test plans and criteria, ensuring that all aspects of the game are thoroughly tested according to the documented design. Any deviations from the GDD identified during testing can be tracked as bugs or issues, facilitating a systematic approach to quality assurance. Overall, the GDD is a vital document that ensures cohesion, clarity, and consistency throughout the game development process, helping to bring the game from concept to reality effectively. Organizing your GDD. Keeping a game design document organized is crucial for ensuring it remains a useful and effective tool throughout the game development process. Here are some strategies to maintain an organized GDD. Start with a detailed table of contents to help team members quickly find specific sections or information. Divide the document into clear, well-defined sections, for example, gameplay mechanics, story and characters, level design, art and aesthetics, etc. Use version numbers and dates to keep track of changes and updates. Maintain a change log at the beginning or end of the document to record what changes were made, by whom and when. Use collaborative platforms like Google Docs, Confluence, or Notion to allow real-time editing and commenting by team members. Manage permissions so to ensure that only authorized team members can edit the document, while others can view or comment. Use templates and consistent formatting styles for headings, subheadings, text, and lists to ensure uniformity. Incorporate visual elements like diagrams, charts, and images to complement the text and provide clarity. Use hyperlinks within the document to link related sections, making it easier to navigate. Cross-reference related sections to avoid redundancy and ensure information is interconnected. Schedule regular reviews and updates to ensure the document stays current and reflects the latest design decisions. Encourage team members to provide feedback on the GDD and incorporate relevant suggestions in a timely manner. Use a commenting system to allow team members to discuss specific sections or propose changes without altering the main text. Highlight key points or sections that require attention or further development. Break down the GDD into smaller modular subdocuments for specific areas. For example, separate documents for story, gameplay mechanics, and art, and link them together. Ensure each module can be expanded or updated independently without disrupting the entire document. Regularly back up the document to avoid data loss and maintain historical versions. Archive older versions of the GDD for reference and to track the evolution of the design. Use clear and concise language to avoid ambiguity and to ensure the document is easy to understand. Include a glossary of terms and acronyms used in the document to help new team members quickly get up to speed. By implementing these strategies, a GDD can be kept well organized, making it an effective reference tool for the entire development team and ensuring the game's vision is consistently communicated and maintained throughout the development process. So before you get started with your own GDD, let's take a look at a couple of examples to give you an idea of what to expect to see in a GDD. So first up, we're going to take a look at my one for Mimic. Now this is a live document, it's still being worked on, it's still being edited, still being reviewed, reflected on as we are developing the game currently as we speak. So let's take a look anyway. So here is the GDD for my game Mimic. And as you can see, we start off here with the name of the game and a contents page with details about all the different elements of this GDD. And we start off with an introduction. So as I've mentioned, we want to start with a few keywords or sentences about what the game actually is. And it's usually here where you define things like the game pillars and also discuss things like user narratives or personality. This can be useful in helping stage what you want the game to feel like to the players as they're playing the game. And with a GDD, you're kind of going from a top-down approach. So you're thinking about macro level descriptions and then getting more and more detailed as you go through the document. So as you can see in this introduction, we are very surface level, talking about the game in very vague terms and not giving any too much details. But as you can see, we're going to a lot more detail as we progress. So after the introduction, we talk about the core gameplay and unique systems that the game includes. And then we start getting into a lot more detail with the player types, the player mechanics, including information about how the player moves and crawls, sprints, how damage is going to work in the game, how we do handling picking up items, death, hiding, all these various elements that we wanted to give as much detail as possible to help communicate how that system is going to work in the game. And as you see, I'm leaving little notes for myself and comments indicating what things I should be testing and what things I want to question or go back to later on as I'm developing the game. Further on, we go into a lot more detail about the various abilities that the characters have, as well as talking a lot more about the menus and user interface that the game will include. And here you'll describe a lot more about how the menus are going to flow together, how matchmaking is going to work in this flowchart, for example, and then going into a lot more detail about different rule sets, how it's going to work with Twitch integration, overall user interface elements, what's going to happen here, the narrative, and also then describing each map. So each map is going to be laid out with details and narrative about the game map itself, including the various rooms that we're going to have. As I've been developing the game, I'm putting in images of the game's rooms and in this case the androids that we have in here, the map layout. As we're developing it, we're adding it to the section to help clarify that in a lot more detail. So as I scroll down, you'll see we've now got screenshots of the game showcasing some of these areas that we have. So that's very much an example of a working live document, something that's currently working in progress, isn't finished, it's still being added to. But let's take a look at a more completed, more polished document that is for a complete game. And this is from Splash Damage for their game Dirty Bomb. They've actually released it, so you can actually view it yourself publicly on their website. So being a polished document that is made available for public use, obviously we see a lot more polish gone into this. But as you can see, very similar setup where we start off at a macro level, describing the various elements of the game in a more vague sense, where we're given a lot more top surface level detail of the game. And then we go into the core gameplay and then go into a lot more detail about how the game is going to work, what kind of things are going to be editable, how are the various systems going to work, how is accuracy and weapon spread going to work. All these things have been calculated, worked out and designed by designers and put into this document. Here we've got a simple diagram showcasing how recoil is going to work. And this is true throughout the document. So as we go through, you'll see we talk about every single gun, every single character, every single level, all of it detailed and explained. Now, for a programmer like myself, this is great because it means I can get given this game design document and be told to work on, say, the wall jump mechanic. And I can look at the diagrams, look at the description, the designs I've put in place, and get on with it. I can just start making and start working on that. And I also then have an idea of what it should be able to achieve at the end. So what does a completed system look like? And this is a great use of the game design document. It is a way for teams to be self-sufficient, independent, and just cracking on with the job at hand. And as you can see from some of these map layouts, you can see where they've made notes and cut content because I don't need it anymore. And you also see that they've designed it in different ways. And this will be because different people are designing the maps. So you can see someone's using this sort of style to design a map. But if I go up, you'll see other examples as well of the maps being designed. If I go up to here, and furthermore, if I keep going back and back and back, I can see more details down to even a paper template drawn on a notepad. But as you can see, these documents can get quite lengthy. This one's just over 300 pages, but they can get far larger. So some studios will actually opt for having a wiki-based design, where they'll actually have like a Wikipedia-like sort of internal document where people can access and edit pages and add pages to it, add details, add images as they're developing it, and it all can be reviewed over the course of the duration of the development process. Now, to help you get started, I have provided you a basic template for a game design document and put in a couple of notes for you to help you get started. So click on the link in the page and you can access this document, and make sure you save a copy of it to your own drive. That way you'll be able to edit it as you so wish.